Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections. We're in Brookfield. We're interviewing 5th District Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner of Menominee Falls. He's a Republican seeking, is it the 19th term, sir?
Yes.
Well, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
A programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Congressman, let's start with the vote. You voted against the $500 million to help the Syrian rebels. Are you afraid that could turn out to be 2014's version of a Gulf of Tonkin resolution, sir?
Partly, yes, but I'm more concerned about the fact that these people have not been vetted, and I don't want to have a huge amount of American arms fall into people who are really on the other side. What's armed ISIS in many cases is the arms that were left behind in Iraq, and ISIS attacked the Iraqi army. They turned around and ran away and dropped their arms, and ISIS has got them now. So when we're arming an ally, we better make darn sure that that group is really an ally rather than a conglomeration of people who might turn around and use those arms against us. What's
the worst case scenario now that we're working with the Syrian rebels, which is both trying to unseat the regime of President Assad and fighting against ISIS? Worst case scenario over there, sir?
Well, the worst case scenario, I think, is that together with Assad, the coalition defeats the Syrian ISIS rebels, and Assad ends up being strengthened. We're really caught between a rock and a hard place in Syria because it's not the case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Bashar Assad is not our friend. He has been a very brutal thug, and he's been in the back pocket of the Russians, as was his father, ever since the Assad family took control of Syria over 40 years ago.
Speaker Boehner said he was willing to call the House back in a special session to vote on what amounts to a declaration of war. Wise move, sir?
Well, I think that there should be a vote in Congress implementing the War Powers Resolution. I support the War Powers Resolution, which does not use the word declaration of war, but that gives the president a certain timeline if the War Powers Resolution ends up failing to wrap things up and get out of there.
How big a threat to the United States do you think ISIS is, sir? Do you get some of these classified briefings?
Well, I stay away from classified briefings because usually what's said there has been in the newspaper a couple of days ahead of time, and going to a classified briefing means we can't talk about it even though it's in an unclassified form. You know, that being said, I think ISIS is a far greater threat than Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was Osama bin Laden playing around with his daddy's money to a deadly effect. ISIS has a lot of money. They have a lot more sophisticated arms that they have been able to capture both in Syria and mostly in Iraq. And more worrisome, I think, is that there are a lot of Americans and Western Europeans who have passports that don't require visas to actually are actually fighting with them, and they can come back here with almost cursory checks at the airport, and that's something all of us ought to worry about.
How likely is it that 12 months from now you're going to see divisions of U.S. troops on the ground in Iraq?
That's up to the president. The president has said no boots on the ground. I think there are boots on the ground there, although they're not being labeled as such. I'm worried about which boots on the ground are supposed to be fighting ISIS. The Iraqi army for the last 20 years has not had a very good record. In both Gulf Wars, we attacked. They threw up their hands and surrendered and left their arms on the ground. And that's what's happened when ISIS has attacked successfully a lot of fairly large towns in Iraq and have gotten up to the outskirts of Baghdad.
In his CBS interview, the president said the intelligence community overestimated the ability of the Kurdish army and underestimated the growth of ISIS, the power of ISIS, the threat of ISIS. Is it that simple, Congressman?
Well, no, it's not that simple, but had the president moved against ISIS a few months ago when there were long lines of vehicles and material going from Syria into Iraq, I don't think we'd be talking about this issue today at all.
You, because of your experience and being the author of the Patriot Act, can you talk about the evolution of the war on terrorism since 9/11, sir?
Well, unfortunately, people think that 9/11 is a thing of the past, and we haven't had a major terrorist strike against the United States with the exception of the Boston Marathon bombing. I can say that the vulnerability is still there. We have an obligation to protect our citizens first, and my worry is that if we do a good job in preventing people from going through airports with U.S. or Western European passports, they will simply come across our very leaky southern border and get into the United States and wait till they get the okay from wherever ISIS command and control is.
As the author of the Patriot Act, would you have changed it, knowing what you know now, sir? Is there any doubt in your mind it was legal?
Well, I don't think what the NSA has been doing is legal. And had the Congress known what the Patriot Act would have been morphed into by both the Bush and the Obama administrations, it never would have passed, and I would not have supported it. I think now that we know what they have been doing, which I think is illegal, Senator Leahy and I have gotten together in a bipartisan manner to make it legal and to restrict the NSA and other intelligence organizations from breaking the law. Now, the secret to stopping that is oversight, and there has been a failure by the intelligence committees in Congress, by the administration, and by the FISA court in providing proper oversight. So as a result, they have got what I think is a ridiculous interpretation of the law, where we thought we had narrowed it to make the inquiry relevant. That court is saying that they can grab everything because something that might be relevant is in there. That makes the haystack a lot bigger to find the needle in.
We talked about this at the convention, and you mentioned working with Senator Leahy. Now, you've drafted the Freedom Act, right?
Yes.
And that would limit the write new rules for NSA, correct, sir?
Well, it's correct, and the biggest rule is that it prohibits bulk collection, which means that if the intelligence community has evidence that somebody is plotting a terrorist attack, they can go to the FISA court, they can get a FISA court warrant, get the information from the phone companies and the IT providers, and then go two hops, meaning who the target is calling and who the target's callers or callees have been calling. And that should be sufficient to put the pieces together. And most of the intelligence community says it has been. The House passed my bill in May.
Yes.
It has been sitting in the Senate basically because there are people on both ends that on one side want to do more and on the other side want to do less. Fact is that the perfect can't be the enemy of the good because the Section 215 records provision expires at the end of June next year, and if we don't pass the Freedom Act, then there will be no ability for the intelligence community or law enforcement to get their hands on information that could be used to protect us.
The future of the Freedom Act, then, does it rest with which party runs the Senate in the next Congress, Congressman?
Well, I would hope that in the lame duck session the Freedom Act would pass, because then we've got to start over from scratch. And I have urged the Senate to pass the Leahy version of the Freedom Act and to get those amendments over to the House of Representatives so we can have this Congress do its job to protect Americans in a constitutional way and in a way that protects all Americans' privacy. The thing is that I passed the Patriot Act because we needed it to protect Americans from 9/11. I never knew that 2 administrations would be breaking the law. We're now going to reiterate constitutional protections under the 4th Amendment. And it always is a balance between privacy rights and national security. And the pendulum has gone too far in one direction.
As a veteran of Congress, how do you see Congress acting if your party controls the Senate, given all the things that your party disagrees with the president on, sir?
Well, the problem is that the Senate still will have the filibuster rule.
Okay.
And the Republicans aren't going to get 60 votes to break a filibuster, with one exception, and that would be in a budget reconciliation bill. And the rules only allow one of those to be passed a year. So I think that one of 2 things will happen, and it will be up to the president. The president can work with the opposition Republican Congress, basically to deal with issues, particularly creating jobs, and to have a tax code that encourages job creation, like President Clinton did in his 2nd term, and to a lesser extent President Bush did in his 2nd term. I would hope the president would choose to do that. On the other hand, the president could choose to double down, and that's going to mean a huge number of vetoes, more filibusters in the Senate, more frustration both in Congress in not getting things done, as well as amongst the public in looking at what Congress is doing. And, I look at the fact that the Republican House of Representatives passed 50 bills to create jobs in the last 4 years, and they disappeared from the radar screen in Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's circular file. And while the president runs around blaming Congress, if he was accurate and a little bit less political, he really should be blaming the Senate of his own party, where I guess he told Senator Reid that he didn't want those bills to ever reach his desk. And the unfortunate thing is, because of that kind of politics, there are a lot of people that are unemployed or underemployed and not being able to earn the type of wages that their talents and their hard work would allow them to do.
Well, as a senior member of our state's delegation to Congress, it must grieve you then to hear that the public opinion polls say only 8% of Americans approve of Congress. I mean, is that your party's fault as much as the other party's fault, sir?
Well, I'd like to think that people should look at the record of the House and compare it with the record of the Senate. The House works in responding to what the American public and the citizens of Wisconsin want, and the Senate kills it again and again and again and again. And I'll be glad to defend my voting record to anybody. I think it is in tune with the citizens of Wisconsin, and particularly to those of the 5th Congressional District. And I look at a lot of work that has been done that I think is constructive and answers the economic problems, particularly the very slow recovery that we've had from the recession, and they never end up getting out of the Senate or even being debated in the Senate.
Impact of the Affordable Care Act on the state of Wisconsin and the 5th District, sir?
Well, I don't think the Affordable Care Act can be fixed. I think it ought to be repealed and replaced. A lot of the impact has been postponed by unilateral action of the president until after the election, such as the mandate to provide insurance. And a lot of the current insurance policies are not going to be adequate under the terms of the Affordable Care Act, and the bad news will come in after the votes are counted. I can say that the Affordable Care Act now is not really one of the top issues that people are talking about, but that's going to change, and it's going to change very quickly. What is a real-time impact is the fact that anybody who has more than 50 employees has got to provide insurance either under the Affordable Care Act or on their own. And there are a lot of small businessmen, particularly in the manufacturing sector here in southeastern Wisconsin, that might have 40 or 45 employees and simply aren't going to hire any more people because they don't want to get caught in this trap. And that means that there are people who could get good jobs if there wasn't this 50 employee floor and aren't getting those jobs now.
Well, if your party controls the Senate and you're reelected, how will your party in Congress respond to changes in the Affordable Care Act? Excuse me.
Well, I think that what we've said is there are certain parts of the Affordable Care Act that are good, such as getting rid of pre-existing conditions exclusion. There are other parts that are job killers and will increase costs to employers, and employers are going to have to make a tough decision on that. The mandates, I think, are part of the problem, and that's why I think repeal and replace is probably the way to go. But there will be some parts of the Affordable Care Act that will be in the replacement. Again, the pre-existing conditions exclusion ban, I think, will be in any type of a reformed health care provision that a Republican Congress will pass and send to the president.
In every speech, the president talks about the need to raise the minimum wage, and every time he says it, what's your response?
Raising the minimum wage is a job killer, and every econometric study indicates that. And the jobs that are killed will be jobs that are on the lower end of the wage scale, particularly part-time jobs. These are the types of jobs that are either second incomes or people who can't find full-time employment end up getting. And we're going to end up having more economic problems, including more people going on various types of government assistance programs, and I think more social problems as well.
Transportation funding. Everybody agrees that the pension smoothing bill is not a long-term fix.
I didn't vote for that because I think it was smoke and mirrors or goofy financing.
What's a better way to pay for our long-term transportation needs, Congressman?
Well, in Wisconsin, the best way to do is to repeal the federal gasoline tax and repeal the highway fund, because traditionally we have always sent $1 to Washington and gotten a lot less back. I call it the chump change. So if we repealed the federal tax and had the state pick up the tax, that would be a way that 100% of what is collected in Wisconsin is spent in Wisconsin. The other thing I would strongly recommend is getting rid of the set-asides, because there's a federal law that says that 10% of the set-asides have got to go for bike paths. And, I like bicycling. I don't think we should be constructing $1 million bike bridges over freeways. like the one in Saukville that I've never seen a bicycle on, and we could put that 10% into the highway fund and deal with the infrastructure problems that this state has. So, let's spend all the money we collect for Wisconsin projects, and let's not have the federal government making a determination that we should be spending money on non-transportation or low-priority transportation issues.
You have been and will continue to be, if you're reelected, in the middle of the debate over immigration. How do you see the next steps on that issue coming out, sir?
Well, as a result of the flood of kids coming across the border from Central America, not from Mexico, but from Central America.
Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador?
Correct. What we, I think, need to do is to separate border security from other immigration issues, and to get the border secure so that immigrants, including children as young as 6 years old, coming across the border in scads. I can't imagine what kind of a parent, would end up putting their 6-year-old kid in a very dangerous journey across Mexico and to get into the United States. But thousands of them apparently have done so. Now, that being said, once we have the border secure and we deal with enforcing the employer sanctions law, because for decades it's been illegal for an employer to hire an undocumented alien, that would turn off the magnet to bring undocumented people across the border, and then and only then should we deal with other issues such as problems with our legal immigration system and what to do with the 11 to 20 million people who are not documented but are in the United States.
And your position on path to citizenship has not changed, correct?
No, it hasn't. Amnesty is an incentive for more illegal immigration. Congress was told that by a nonpartisan commission that was headed by Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame, who is a self-admitted political liberal, back in 1986. And he said that amnesty for illegal immigrants, no matter what it's called, pathway to citizenship, earned legalization, etc., would encourage more illegal immigration. Well, we had somewhere around 3 million undocumented aliens in the United States then, and now it's between 11 and 20 million. We can't afford to make a mistake again when we know that we made a mistake the first time.
As you meet with 5th District voters, are they asking about the threat of the Ebola virus, Congressman?
Recently, they've been very worried about that.
Are you able to reassure them, or do you have your own concerns?
Well, I have my own concerns on that. I think the administration, once again, has underestimated the threat as they have with ISIS. Really, they haven't been concerned with protecting Americans. That should be the first priority of any government, whether it's from terrorism or whether it's from disease. And obviously they haven't done that. I think that we ought to close the border to people who hold passports from the 3 countries where Ebola is out of control, at least until we have an appropriate screening apparatus. The patient in Dallas lied to officials in Liberia when he filled out the form before he got on his first plane, and I'd be very concerned that a terrorist group like ISIS would end up having a concerted and deliberate effort to bring people who were infected into the United States.
With all these international crises and domestic issues, has the focus shifted away from our $17 trillion national debt and the looming bankruptcies of both Social Security and Medicare, sir?
Well, it shouldn't. But folks in the media, they basically bring issues to the attention of the American people, and a lot of what I hear from 5th District residents is in response to what appears on the media, including the social media. Okay. It's not just the so-called traditional media. That's a ticking time bomb. The president criticized George Bush in 2008 for running the debt up. Well, he's doubled it, and he's still got 2 years to go. That that concerns me, and it concerns me because if we end up devaluing the dollar and not having enough money to pay for programs like Social Security and Medicare, the first people who will be hurt and the people who will be hurt the most with a credit collapse by the United States are poor people. And those are the people whose future is on the line more than it is now. If all of a sudden, due to inflation or inability to borrow, social safety net programs, and Medicare and Medicaid are two of the most important ones, end up not being worth very much in terms of purchasing power.
While we're on the budget issue, do you like Congressman Ryan's idea to block welfare grants to the states, sir?
Absolutely, I do. Wisconsin's welfare programs are not the same as New York City's or rural Mississippi's. And I think the government that is closer to the people will do a better job of devising programs that actually meet the needs within that state or within that community, rather than the one-size-fits-all plans that have come out of Washington for the better part of the last 50 years.
Energy issues. Do you support the Keystone Pipeline?
I do, and the Keystone Pipeline would be a huge job creator in Wisconsin because the Michaels Pipeline Company will be one of the prime contractors for it, and a lot of people who are sitting at home waiting for the okay and then being sent as Michaels employees out to the Plain States will end up getting really good paying jobs. The president has been listening to environmental extremists saying no, we shouldn't build the Keystone Pipeline. The Prime Minister of Canada himself is saying we've got this oil, we're going to sell it, and we'd like to sell it to the United States, but if you don't want it because of a political issue here, he's going to build a pipeline across the mountains to a Canadian Pacific port and to sell it to China. And then that will be used to compete against us.
The other issue, in June, the EPA announced the draft rule. They want a 30% cut in coal-related emissions by 2030. Your position on that, sir?
That's terrible, particularly for a state like ours that is heavily dependent upon electricity from coal-fired power plants. We're over 60% dependent upon electricity from a coal-fired plant. These are all clean coal plants. Our utilities, led by We Energies, have spent a huge amount of money to make our plants clean coal plants, and all of a sudden that money will be wasted. First, the impact on consumers, particularly low-income consumers, is going to be tragic when bills go up by a factor of maybe 1.5 to 3. But also, we're number one in per capita manufacturing. And if the cost of energy for our manufacturing companies that hire a lot of people, particularly in the southern part of the state, goes up through the roof, we're going to be losing jobs to other parts of the country and to international competitors like China and India. What is being proposed by the EPA is an outsourcing of jobs from Wisconsin to other parts of the country and to the world.
International business question. Should corporate inversions be stopped, Congressman?
Well, yes, they should be, but the way to stop it is not through more regulation. Secretary of the Treasury, Lou, has been proposing. Corporate inversions make money for corporations because we've got the highest marginal corporate income tax in the world. And it saves money for U.S. multinationals to keep it abroad because we have a repatriation tax, and it also gives an encouragement for other countries to reincorporate themselves in countries that have significant lower corporate income tax, including Canada. You got to remember that the money that stays abroad isn't taxed here, and the corporate income tax is a net profits tax. So companies or corporations that don't make profits don't pay any corporate income tax.
Campaign finance issues in the wake of Citizens United and the McCutcheon ruling. Some in Washington want a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. How do you feel about campaign finance now that there are so many fewer limits on who can give and
Well,
what has to be reported and disclosed?
there are a lot of people that want to amend the First Amendment, and this would be the first time in the history of the country, if they're successful, that the Bill of Rights would be amended. That is a terrible idea because some of the advocates of overturning those two decisions, basically want to make illegal politically incorrect speech. My definition of politically incorrect speech is speech by people who disagree with someone. And I think that's what's happening. Every time these people have advocated campaign finance reform since Watergate, the cure has been worse than the disease, and we've had more and more campaign finance go actually off the books, meaning not limited, and in many cases you don't have to disclose your contributions. My answer to this is to repeal all of these restrictions and to allow any United States citizen or entity to contribute unlimited amounts to any candidate for federal office, but to require them to put the exact source and exact amount of everything they get up on the internet before the money hits their bank account. And that way everybody could see before the election whether a special interest was attempting to buy a candidate for office, and people could go to the polls with that information and choose who they wanted to vote for. That's the way it's done in the state of Virginia, rather than having all of these restrictions. And anytime there's more restriction, people figure out a way to get around it. And we've had that ever since the 1975 campaign finance reforms that were passed in the wake of Watergate. The Supreme Court has been very plain every time one of these cases has reached them that these restrictions violate the First Amendment and the right to political speech. They have said, however, that candidates can be regulated, whereas people who do not voluntarily put their name on the ballot cannot be. My proposed reform would have all of the money go through a candidate's account, and I think we would see elections be a lot more transparent in that, even though there will be criticism saying, well, you're going to allow corporations and unions to buy candidates. Maybe they're doing that now, but the important thing is to let people know about it before Election Day.
We're almost out of time, so just a couple questions. And running for your 19th term, you have to have a pretty good idea of what you can achieve in your next 2 years. So tell me what your top 3 priorities would be in your next term.
If we don't get a Freedom Act passed this Congress, that would be my top priority. I would like to continue reaching across the aisle to modernize the Voting Rights Act, because the federal government does have a role in protecting people's right to vote from invidious discrimination. And the third priority is supporting my colleagues in passing a budget that slows down the rate of borrowing. Paul Ryan, I think, has done the country a huge service, whether you agree with him or not, in coming up with a way to reform entitlement programs in a manner that people will not be significantly hurt, as well as reforming welfare programs by block granting them. I think we have a choice between these types of new reforms where we help people out without continuously going into debt, and what has been going on for the last literally 50 years where we just borrow and spend. I've seen statistics, that indicate that our money on anti-poverty programs in the last 50 years has been higher than what the national debt is now. Now, I haven't seen what the people who've come up with these figures have defined what is an anti-poverty program, but what I can say is that either all or a significant part of our national debt has been caused by all of this spending. And the really unfortunate thing is it hasn't worked because the number of people in America who are at or below the poverty line is about the same percentage when LBJ declared war on poverty 50 years ago.
And then finally, do you want to highlight any differences with your Democratic opponent on November 4th, sir?
Well, he's part of the far left. Sometimes he goes past the president by advocating, for example, we go back to a top income tax rate of 70%, which is really going to hit small businesses. You know, what I can say is that President Obama has said that this election is a referendum on his policies, even though it's not on the ballot. I accept his challenges. President Obama's policies are a failure, and he has one of the lowest approval ratings now than any president in recent memory.
Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner of Menominee Falls is a Republican seeking re-election in the 5th. Congressman, time.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.